I'm standing in the right spot.
I think it is.
Which-
1 second.
Which button do I push, Stacey? To get it to advance?
One of those.
Yay. Okay. So how many of you don't have any rental properties? Just checking. Okay. I don't have any either, but I think about it. We're going to go through a couple of things today that I see as an agent to be the 7 most costly mistakes that are going on. And some of those are things that Stacy and Shane had or didn't have in place. Everything from what name is on the title, as well as the insurance policy, and why that's important. The correct policy type. Is it really a landlord policy? Does it need to be a landlord policy because it's a long-term rental? Or are you renting that as a vacation rental and it's a short-term rental? And the specialties that come along with that, coverages or lack thereof. How much coverage is the right amount of coverage? We were just talking about loan values and appraisal values, which in reality mean nothing in the insurance world. We don't care what the appraisal value is. We don't care what your loan value is. We'll go through some of that. We'll also go through some things that I see that are missing on regular landlord policies all the time. These are things that we forget. And then insuring vacant dwellings, because are you seeing that a lot? Are people still moving in, buying a home and then going back to where they're from, leaving that home vacant for a while and then coming back when they're ready to move in? Are you seeing that sit? Or are they moving in right away?
I'm not seeing a ton of.
Seeing a lot of
vacant
flippers at all? Is that going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's still going on, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, construction projects, vacancies, yes.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about insuring vacant dwellings, and then what you can require of your tenants, because you can make insurance requirements of them as well, which means that you're not on the hot seat if something happens. And then we'll talk about liability too, because that's huge. Liability means you don't have the right coverage. Maybe you're losing all those things you've invested so well in, so hard in, all your hard-earned money. So why is it important whose name is on the title of a home, of a property? Whether it's your home or a rental or short-term rental, why does it matter whose name's on the insurance policy and the title?
Well, it depends because if they sue somebody, oh, who's covered?
Right,
And
exactly.
who owns the property?
See, are you allowed to answer these
No.
questions?
Oh, no.
Coffee card for you anyway. That's exactly it. The contract in insurance is with you, the named insured, who should also be the title donor of the property. You can't insure something you don't own. What we see often is that you'll close on a loan in your name, your individual name or your couple name. And then what happens 30 days down the line, you and you quit claim that property to that LLC. What do people most often forget to do? Change the policy as well. Yeah. So you've got Jane and Joe Smith on the policy, and now all of a sudden the title says Jane and Joe's LLC. A fire occurs and the insurance company says, who are we paying for this property? This says, the title says Jane and Joe's LLC, and yet the policy is in Jane and Joe Smith's name. Well, we're not paying this claim because the right person's not insured. We owe Jane and Joe Smith. We don't own this LLC. Easy ways to fix that. You add the LLC, the trust, the estate, whatever it might be on as an additional insured on those properties. Excuse me, those policies. Easy, very easy and inexpensive. Some companies don't charge for that at all, but making sure you do that is the biggest issue. Make sure that you and the entity are insured on that policy. If you're looking at a personal policy, so single family residences, usually up to 4 plexes on a personal policy versus commercial, which is 5+. So your apartment complexes and 5 plexes up. Same thing, both entities need to be named. Commercial policies, more often than not, you can name the LLC as the primary named insured and still put you as the individuals on the policy too, especially if you're living in part of that 5-plex. So make sure the right person's insured. So when something happens to that property, the right people are getting paid for that loss as well. My favorite story, and I probably shouldn't tell it because it's really, it's often not appropriate, but contentious divorce. This is actually a real story. Contentious divorce, husband wants to shield his assets from the soon-to-be ex-spouse. So he quit claims the home to his girlfriend's name. And what did he forget to do? He forgot to change the policy. So when the mysterious fire occurred and the home burned to the ground, and the insurance company said, the title says it's Lisa Jones. Why do you have this insurance policy when it's her house? Coverage declined. You have no policy. The girlfriend's actual name was Karma. So it's just very important that the right people, what?
Was that really her name?
No. No, but I think it should have been.
Did they end up paying?
They did not. What they did do, though, because the policy and the owner were not the same, is they said, okay, with the time you quit claim the home into Karma's name, we'll give you your premium back from the time that happened to today, or to the date of loss. Here you go. Here's your $33, but you now have no home to live in or to sell or anything else. So the contract, again, it's with the named insured on the policy and the titled owner of the property. So really important that that is correct. Okay. Policy considerations. VRBOs and Airbnbs are big and getting bigger. Why? Why is it a big thing? Can you rent a VRBO or an Airbnb for more than you can sometimes an annual lease? Are you still seeing that? Is that happening still? I know it's that way in McCall a lot, which is why they're having so many of those come up. But you can often rent a Airbnb even just on weekends and make more money than you can an annual lease on a regular landlord policy. The problem with that is sometimes you start out with a home as a landlord, annual lease, 6-month lease, whatever it might be, and then you change your mind and put it in an Airbnb or a VRBO. And you do what again? Forget to change the policy. And there are differences in the coverage that you need. If you're Airbnb-ing a property, you're pretty much a hotelier, right? You've got people in and out of there. You maybe have someone coming in to clean. If you're a landlord and your tenant is in there for a long period of time, 6 months, whatever it might be, they clean the shower, the tub with something slick, they get in and slip and fall. Who's at fault? They are. It was their cleaning product. It was their cleaning that got them to that point. If it's an Airbnb in a short-term period of time and you have a cleaning service or yourself go in and clean that and you use that product, or your cleaning service uses that product and the weekend tenant falls, then who's at fault? You are. So liability issues are huge. They change dramatically. There are things that are not covered under a standard landlord policy, and this is both commercial and personal, they're not covered under those policies, but would be under a correct, actually I should say proper VRBO or short-term rental policy. The company that does that is actually called Proper Insurance Company. Those policies are expensive. Generally, so are your rents. You're getting more money on those. They're usually, I would say, 5 times the cost of a regular landlord policy because the risk is so much more. It doesn't matter how well the tenant on a short-term rental is vetted. Can they pass through some of those things and get by with it's actually the frat boys that are in that VRBO this weekend? Yes, ma'am.
So in the insurance world, what is considered short-term rental? At what point does it no longer remain short-term rental?
It depends on the carrier. Some of them have their own definitions, but usually if it's anything less than 6 months, some companies it's 60 days. It varies. It really does depend. So it'd be one of those things you want to run by your insurance company to figure that out. Other things that aren't covered, bed bugs. Nobody ever wants to talk about that, but it happens even in the cleanest of places. Under a standard property policy, insect and vermin are excluded. Under a proper insurance for short-term rental, it's not excluded, it's covered. The frat boys come into the short-term rental, they drink it up, they send somebody out to get more beer, and on the way, he runs somebody over on the sidewalk. That never happens, right? That's not covered under standard landlord policy. It's not your party. It's the third party having that liability that's the issue. You put a proper policy in place, I love that because their name is proper. You actually have coverage for those things, because who's going to get sued? Everyone. The people walking by on the sidewalk, everybody's going to get sued in a case like that.
Deep pockets.
Yes, yes. And the minute they find out you might have them, you are top of the list. Yep.
What about the umbrella? Is that like, does not? or-
It depends. Some umbrella, and this one's a tough one because we have so many of these in place. Some personal umbrellas, if you have a personal umbrella in place, some of them will go over the VRBOs, the short-term rentals. If it's on a commercial policy form, like proper insurance does, your personal umbrella doesn't go over that. But normally you can get more liability on those commercial policies too. You can get a $2 million primary liability policy, and makes it all worthwhile to have the right coverage. So,
A short-term rental is a commercial policy.
yes, if it's done well. That's not to say there are companies who aren't doing it. Safeco, Travelers, State Farm, I mean, many of them are doing it, and they do what they call just a little short-term rental endorsement to the policy. But does it add all those things in? Does it add in the third-party liability, the bed bug coverage, all of those things that aren't covered? It doesn't. It just lets the company know that it's short-term rental, and they may charge you a little bit more for that.
And so in that case, you're compliant with disclosing to your insurance company because you've
Right.
added this endorsement.
Right?
Your pockets aren't as deep, your coverage isn't as deep.
Well, you could still have your personal umbrella in place, and it would go over that policy.
Mhm.
It's just that if there's no coverage at all, if it is, for example, a bed bug incident and you're sued because of that, because you know that's what's going to happen, we sue each other in America. If there's no coverage under your policy, your umbrellas may not kick in to defend you either. And defense costs are what eat away those limits quicker than any jury award.
So when you talk about bed bugs, we shouldn't just be worried about the expense that we have to get them out of our place. We have to be worried about who catches them then from our place.
Right.
And then.
And how upset they are about
Mhm.
it. Yes, absolutely.
Can you get on your short-term rental policy an endorsement for third-party liability?
Again, depending on the company, because no companies do anything the same. It just makes life interesting that way. Makes my job super interesting. You may or may not be able to do that depending on your company. I would say most of them probably not.
So how would you cover yourself for third party? With an umbrella?
In some cases, depends on, there are two different kinds of umbrellas, so to speak. There's excess liability that basically is a following form that says if you've got this coverage and it's covered under your primary policies, we'll cover it under the umbrella. A true umbrella will actually drop down in some cases and provide coverage for things that an excess liability would not. So again, depends on what you have in place, which is all the more reason why when you're doing this is why we went through such great detail, painstaking detail, maybe for Stacy, because I know I drove her crazy asking for information. And
I was so
and-
grateful you were asking because I wasn't asked last time and I didn't feel like anyone, I didn't know if I was covered. I just was relying on being covered and I finally knew someone is going through details on my policy. And so it's okay if I don't know all the answers about insurance. So I thought it was great.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. I know I did drive you crazy, but it's okay. That's my job.
Yeah, no, I loved it. Yeah.
Other questions on short-term rental versus landlord policies? Okay. When you make a change, make sure you talk to your agent, make sure you make those changes in the policy, have them explain to you exactly what noting it as a short-term rental actually does versus putting it on a proper. And they're not the only company that does it. They just happen to be one that does it exceptionally well. And they do more of them across the country than anyone else. But just know what the differences are, what's covered and what's not covered. I think we kind of touched on this a little bit already. Your insurance policy doesn't care what your purchase price is, what your loan amount is, although your lender will sometimes beg to differ. Your lender likes to tell the insurance people, we need this much coverage. Well, no, you don't. If you buy a 900 square foot single family home on an acre and you pay, what would you pay for something like that?
$500.
$500,000
Oh, for a price?
For a price?
Yeah.
if you're purchasing that?
Yeah, yeah, $550.
Do you need $500,000 coverage on that 900 square foot home? Probably not. So your insurance is there to rebuild the structures that you're insuring. It doesn't matter what the loan amount is, doesn't matter what the appraisal is, we don't care what the assessor says. You want your agent to figure out what replacement value is. The big problem with that right now is it's fluctuating so much. We have a hard time keeping track, and we'll spend hours trying to figure out what the replacement cost is. Usually insurance agents will plug information into a matrix that's called a replacement cost estimator. The unfortunate thing about those right now, especially here, and it's this way across the country, is that those things aren't keeping up with what's going on in the real world. So replacement cost estimators are still kicking out things that are telling me, oh, we can insure this house for $180 a square foot. I don't think so. I mean, I'm talking to builders who say, we won't rebuild, we won't touch a rebuild or a new build for less than 300 a square foot. That's not a good day. So replacement cost is what you want on those structures. That's what you need to ask for. That's what your agent should give you. And most agents are more than well aware of that. Your biggest argument would be with your lender if there's one in place. Questions on replacement cost? Not an easy thing to figure out all the time, but it can be done.
Well, and how often are we needing to look at our replacement costs?
Right now, every day. So it's changing so much. There's not a good way to keep track of it. Look for extended replacement cost on your policies because that gives you a buffer. Sometimes that's 25%, and that's 25% over and above the coverage amount you have. So if you've got a home insured, I would love to say 100,000. Nobody insures a home for 100,000 anymore. If you've got a home insured for 500,000 and you get 25% more than that to rebuild, that's your actual coverage amount. But use that 25% as your buffer. Some companies are often giving that at 50% or even 100% more coverage to rebuild. Find out what that is. Make sure you've got that buffer too.
Do you have success talking to lenders and telling them they have them come down on the amount of coverage they require?
They have no choice. They actually, and what will happen is that we'll show them a replacement cost estimator, and we're bumping those up so that it's realistic, because $180 isn't going to cut it. But we'll send them a copy of a legitimate replacement cost estimator, and that's actually what they have to accept for the coverage amount. Yep. And that's not my rule or an insurance company's rule. That it's a law. They have to accept that. They can't require you to carry more coverage than a replacement value. Other questions on that? I'm probably overdoing my time. Aren't I,
Oh, no,
Stacy?
you've got plenty. You're good.
Okay.
We're so good.
This one's a quick one because this is pretty easy. Personal property on a landlord policy is something everybody forgets to add. Agents forget to add it. You buy a home, single family, duplex, whatever it is, and you put coverage on the structure and you forget that we have these things inside. And when a tenant leaves and they're upset about things, how often can they take this stuff out? I mean, it's not built in. The refrigerator can be removed. The dishwasher can be removed. The stove can be removed. Even the microwave can be removed, although it's actually considered a built-in. Make sure you have personal property coverage on your rental property, your landlord policies as well. Or know that you're self-insuring that property, which a lot of people choose to do. Just know that if there's a loss, don't expect that to be covered unless it's considered built-in. Wall-to-wall carpet, built-in. The microwave, likely built-in. Washer and dryer, definitely personal property.
The toilets can be taken too.
Yes. Yes, and that actually comes under the building coverage.
Yeah.
So if they rip out all your fixtures and the things that people do, if they take out all those things, that's building coverage. So you'd still have coverage for that. It's these things that aren't built in that are personal property. That one's an easy one. And actually the double ovens in that picture, those are built-ins. So things that somebody, actually, I've heard someone say, if you can pick the home up and turn it upside down, anything that might fall out is personal property. Everything else is built in. Commonly excluded barrels. This doesn't come up much, but you may already all know this, but flood and earthquake, in this case, landslide, all excluded perils under a standard policy. Know that that's not covered. If you've got a home sitting at Terra Nativa that might slide down the hill, get landslide coverage. Only one of the people up there actually had that at that time. But this is excluded under all standard property policies, whether that's personal or commercial. And this is the ugly part. Now we're gonna talk about liability a little bit, because this is where you stand to lose more. I mean, knowing that it's a $500,000 structure that you have to rebuild, that's a finite number. You know what that looks like. You have no idea what someone might sue you for, and that's where you stand to lose more than anywhere else. The tenant destroys your property. Again, finite number, you can put that back. They put a meth lab in, and now your property is completely destroyed, still a finite number. You know what you have, I mean, even if you have to burn the place down and start over, you know what the value of that dwelling is. The dog bite, on the other hand, you have no idea what that could rack up. Anybody want to guess what the average dog bite claim value is these days? Very good.
Wow.
Wow, it's 45,000 right now is the average of a dog bite claim. And it doesn't matter if it's your dog or your tenant's dog that bites someone. Who's gonna get named? Everybody. And that's where having the renters make sure that they have tenant coverage is,
And that applies to therapy houses as well.
yes. Yes, you can require of your tenants, and this is an Idaho thing as well, you can write it right in your lease, that your tenants have to have their own renters coverage. It is super inexpensive coverage. You can get a $20,000 policy for their contents. Well, you can't, but they can. Their contents, 20,000, 300,000 liability for $10, $15 a month. Very inexpensive policies. It's not a big ask. That way, when something like this does happen, when they do have a dog that bites somebody, and it doesn't have to be a German Shepherd. I mean, it could be a Schnauzer. I mean, I don't know if Schnauzers bite people a lot, but
Chihuahuas are pretty brutal.
Chihuahuas are. And actually labs, because they're so protective of their people and their families. We have a lot of labs, but they're not on the bad breed list. German Shepherds are. But you can require that your tenant have that policy so that they're the first line of defense, not your policy. Yes, sir.
Can you have, if it's allowed to have a tenant get this insurance only if they happen to have a companion animal? Or do you have to have it across all your tenants?
I think you might have a problem if you picked and choose like that. I would say you're better off to say everybody has to have a policy and require a certain level. I know First Rate will often say we want to see proof of insurance from renters, and we're requiring a minimum 100,000 liability policy. Well, 100,000 liability is just super inexpensive. And to go from 100,000 to 300,000 liability on a renter's policy is about $18 a year. So $1.50 a month, very inexpensive.
Is the tenant the beneficiary then, or? do they have
Yes, because
coverage?
it's protecting their stuff, which you can't cover anyway, and their liability. So if they cause an issue, if they burn the place down and they have, I have been in this scenario. The tenant caused a kitchen fire. They had no renter's insurance, and it was their stupidity that caused the fire, but they have no liability. They have no assets for the landlord to go back on other than future earnings, which they can do, but that's a long-term recovery.
What about the dog bite example? So if could they go after the landlord as well as they can collect from the tenant and then have another lawsuit?
They will try to name you, because again, that's what happens is the attorneys want to look for the deepest pocket, and you may be it. But your policy will still come to your defense, but it's not your dog. So the chances of there being something awarded are less. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen, because it can. If you commonly rent to tenants who you know have dogs that engage in bad behavior, that could be a problem.
Pattern.
But even if you don't rent to tenants who have dogs, or if you don't allow pets at all, the kitchen burning down, the candle fire, the friend slipping, or being the drunk frat party, I mean, wouldn't all of those things fall back
Or
on the
liability.
renter's insurance?
Yep,
Or
absolutely.
it's renter's insurance.
It is.
And so it's literally no sweat off a landlord's back to require a tenant to have renter's insurance. And it's only was less than $100 a year, wasn't it?
Yeah, $10 to $15 a month, depending on how much coverage. I mean, if they have a policy where they need $250,000 contents coverage, that's different.
Mhm.
It's going to be a little bit more than that. But the liability itself is the inexpensive part of the policy.
So I have a quick question. The landlord requires landlord insurance. And in my case, I do that. you have to follow up with them though, if they rent year over year, that they renew their policy.
Mhm.
Oftentimes they'll get it the first time and then they won't renew. So let's say someone didn't renew, so they are no longer in possession of a tenant policy. Their dog bites someone, you did require it. Where does liability fall in that instance? You meaning the landlord
Right.
required it initially,
Your policy is still going to be there to come to your defense.
right?
They obviously have nothing. You might end up being the deep pocket because they're going to go after something somewhere. And I'm not bad mouthing attorneys by any means. That's their job.
Yeah.
Their job is to recover money for somebody who's injured. If there is no primary policy in place, you become the first line of defense.
Okay.
Yep. And they're so inexpensive. And if a tenant loses their stuff in a fire, now all of a sudden they have nothing. So you're encouraging them to help themselves by having a policy, not just for their liability, but for their stuff. Questions on that? Now we get to we've kind of hit this already. Again, excess liability or umbrella. Umbrellas have bigger coverage, so to speak. So umbrella, they'll usually go over your home, your autos, your rentals, anything that's in your personal name. And some of those LLCs that are also named as additional interest. You go to a commercial policy, you need commercial liability or commercial umbrella. So they're going to be separate. Make sense?
So at first you said you get an umbrella that covers your personal stuff at home and also your rentals, but then you went on to say that actually you've got to get two separate umbrella types.
If you've got personal properties, so single family residences up to 4-plex. If you have apartment complexes, 5-plex and over, those are usually written on a commercial policy, and that's a separate type of umbrella. So personal umbrella versus commercial.
So you can't get one that does both. You
Right.
gotta get two.
But our commercial policy for 8-plex, for example, that has an automatic like 1 or 2 million in liability in that policy. So it didn't seem like we needed a separate umbrella
Right.
for that commercial policy. Whereas all of our 1 to 4 unit rentals are under, even the ones in LLCs, and this is one of the things Renae helped me with. She was able to put those under our personal umbrella, which
Because
wasn't
it's a
previously
disregarded
possible.
entity?
Because the policy is in her name and Shane's.
Right.
And the LLC is listed as additional insured, because that's a personal policy, can then be included in their personal umbrella.
But they wouldn't be able to have more than 8 units or more than 5 units property under that same umbrella? Because it's commercial?
Single family units are okay. Well, again, that depends on the company. I've got one company who says if you've got more than 5 rentals, single family and units being one family,
Right.
whether that's a duplex or a single family, if you've got more than 5 units at all, they don't want anything to do with you or your personal umbrella. You have to go to a company who will allow some 10, some 15, some 20. It just depends. What I mean when I say 5-unit building, one structure that is 5 units, that's a commercial unit, as opposed to a 4-plex that can be written on a personal. And that's a generality. Not all companies are that way, but most are that way. Make sense? So the biggest question is, how much can you afford to lose? You have 4, 5, 6, 10 rentals. How deep is your pocket? Is $1 million enough? Is 2 million enough? So those are things that you need to look at when you're looking at the umbrella, is what do I stand to lose if someone sues me? And even if they're in an LLC, can they name you, the person, the individuals? They can, they will, they'll name everyone. Again, the guy walking by when the incident happened, they'll name everyone, but you do have a buffer with your LLC. And then you also have the policy that's going to come to your defense no matter what, because you've got both entities listed. You, the people, and you, the LLC, the trust, the estate. So pay attention to how much coverage you actually might need. We talk about $1 million umbrella all the time. That's very standard. They're very cheap policies. Umbrella is the only good buy left in insurance. They're very inexpensive, but don't just settle for a 1 million umbrella if your assets, your net worth is 4 million. Get the extra coverage. It's very inexpensive most of the time, and make sure you've got the right protection. so that
What do
you
you-
don't lose those assets that you've worked so hard to gain.
What do you normally recommend the umbrella is equal to your total assets?
Your net worth.
Oh.
Yes, that's always a stunner. Yes, that one's a little painful. That was it.
So, how about manufactured homes that don't have foundation? I've been paying more insurance. How come?
Manufactured homes are not written on a standard stick-built home policy. They are, it's a manufactured home policy. And whether they're on a foundation or they're not, actually doesn't matter. It's still a manufactured home.
Oh.
And there are half a dozen companies that write those.
Yeah.
They're difficult sometimes to get coverage on. If they're over 20 years, they're very difficult to get coverage on. And the premiums on them are really high.
Yeah.
Yeah, very difficult to get. You can get them, it's just, they're more costly. And you have to go to a special policy for those.
Right.
Yeah. So anytime you do have that issue, make sure you go in and say, I have a manufactured home, not I need a landlord policy. And your agent doesn't ask the right question and gives you a policy on a stick-built home. Because if they do a drive-by shooting with a camera just to check the property, and they realize that then it's a manufactured home, they end up canceling you and you go through the hassle of all of that.
Well, they should drive by everything once a year or something, shouldn't you?
In a perfect world, yes. But reality is not even all insurance companies inspect every property they insure. They have neither the resources nor the people to commit to that, especially now when nobody's working. So,
I have an interesting, we just recently purchased a property. They had me take the photos and upload them to a specific, I had to download an app called VeriSite, and I uploaded the photo. It was so interesting. They told me exactly what photos they needed. Like the street sign, you know, the house number, et cetera.
right?
So that's how they're getting around it, I guess,
Yes.
without the labor.
And you'll see more and more of that happen. Whereas the insurance companies used to, you know, sub out to a guy who they paid so much to go do all these inspections, drive-by shootings. You'll see more and more of that come back to the owner of the property for those pictures because they don't have, they can't find the guy anymore who was doing their drive-by shootings. And the costs of that are going, you know, you no longer pay $5 an hour for that. You have to pay $18 an hour. So I don't know what they paid. But it's more difficult. So you'll see more and more of that happen. The good thing is you can take the best picture when you're doing that. So in the best light, not in the winter, in the summer, when everything's blooming and beautiful. So yes.
What's the value of loyalty to your agent because they know who you are and they worked for you in the past? Compared to if you were less expensive?
I would say, depending on the company that you're with. So there are three different routes for insurance. You go through an independent agent who has access to tons of companies. You have your direct writers, State Farm, Farmers, Allstate, and then you have your 1-800 get cheap insurance. Your relationship with your agent is your leverage because they should go to bat for you should something happen. So long-term relationships are good. If you don't have a good long-term relationship, it's probably not doing you any good at all. Putting a lot of your eggs, people used to say, I don't want all my eggs in one. I don't want any one insurance company to have all my stuff. That's also leverage. The more stuff you have with one company. Because when the company comes to me and says, Stacy had a claim, what are we gonna do? We don't want her anymore. We're gonna cancel her policy. Well, I go to bat for Stacy. It's me fighting, saying, look, we have all of these policies. They're great people. They've paid you this much money throughout the year. They're gonna continue paying this much money. That's your agent's job, is to go to bat. That's why you have a good relationship with an agent. So it's your leverage and it's their leverage. So, other questions? Yes,
But
sir.
I think it's also important that your agent knows this kind of stuff. I mean, I just felt like I had an agent who liked me and I liked them. But I don't feel like they knew the inner workings enough to get me the right coverage and the right policies. And I found it was very confusing. And when you have a portfolio with more than a couple properties, you're handing someone like 4 hours of work and saying, hey, are you willing to work 4 hours for me just to figure out what your insurance recommendation is for me? And maybe you get my business. And that's where I think I felt like I was a little lost.
So Stacy and I don't like each other, but we work well together.
Well, and that was until I love Renae, but that was
Sorry, I
until
couldn't
I
help
went to
myself.
Renae, you know, 'cause I just, like, I liked my previous agent before I switched to Renae, but I didn't feel like, well, my properties weren't under an umbrella, and I thought they were. I mean, that was like cut and dried, and none of the LLC properties were under the umbrella, and I was told they couldn't be, and they can be. So I would say it depends on who your agent is.
Well,
too.
yeah, and I wonder if my trust is on my policies, which would be my fault, but. if I
Yes,
didn't
because there's no way
know-
for your agent to know that if you don't tell
Yeah, so I wrote it down.
them. Good. That's the whole point, is that you learn something from this that you can take back and make sure that things are right. And worst case scenario, if you have a question that somebody can't answer, grab my card and call me, because information's free and I share. So. I have one more
So are
question.
you an independent agent?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you Payne West?
Yes, ma'am.
You are. I didn't say with, I said, are you?
Oh, am I Payne West? No, I am with Payne West. That's the agency that I work for.
I was just curious if agents sort of specialize in commercial versus personal insurance, and should you split it up?
Sometimes it depends. There are, for example, in my agency, we are 36 people. Some of those people focus solely on personal lines. Some of them focus solely on small commercial, some on very large commercial. There are a couple people that do personal and small commercial. So unless you're a multi-million-dollar complex, you're small commercial. There are several people, and you'll find it with State Farm and some of the independent agencies where they do both. And they're very well versed in doing the personal and the small commercial. The good thing about that is they can keep track of both of those things. They'll know when they can tell you you've got too many rentals, or the company's not going to do this if you buy one more. We need to go commercial. Maybe we put them all on a commercial policy. You just have to interview the agent and get a comfort level with whether they can do both or not. Yes, sir.
Is there a way to know how much of a claim is worth putting in versus your premiums going up?
Ooh.
That's a comfort level as well. You're always going to have a deductible. And the bad thing about claims is that it's usually not just one that you have. Usually you'll have one and it'll be a small one. And then a year later, you'll have a big kitchen fire or something. Well, now you've got two claims, and now the companies will most often cancel you altogether, because most preferred markets don't want you if you've had two claims, and they'll non-renew your policy altogether. So your agent should counsel you in that regard as well. No one should ever say, don't turn in this claim, but do you know what the consequences are? You turn in this $2,500 loss and you've got $1,000 deductible and you get a $1,500 payout. And then 6 months from now, you really do have a kitchen fire. Well, now you're going to pay double the insurance. So your $1,500 payout is toast, hasn't done you any good. But it's your comfort level. I encourage people to take a higher deductible when they can, because that's going to eliminate those small losses anyway. You might as well pocket the change if it makes sense. If you go from a $1,000 deductible to a $5,000 deductible and it saves you $80 a year, is that worth it? It could be in the long run, maybe not in the short, but it does prevent you from having those small losses occur on your record. Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay, that's it.
When you say that they cancel your policies, does the claim follow the property or the owner?
Yes.
Say you have a claim and you sell it, does it still stigmatize the
It
property,
does.
or does the owner have trouble getting?
They get you coming and going.
Oh,
Yep. So if you have a claim in a location that you're at, that is your claim and it will follow you wherever you go, regardless of what location you buy, that's going to go with you. It most likely won't affect your rental properties, because if it was a homeowner's claim,
what if it is, what if it's a rental property and then you sell it by another property?
it usually in that case, again, it's going to depend on the company. Are you familiar with a CLUE report? Anyone? CLUE is Comprehensive Loss Underwriting Exchange. It's like a clearinghouse for claims. oh my gosh, what am I trying to say? A credit report. It's like a credit report. So all insurance companies report claims. So if you have several rentals properties under your name, they're all the losses will show up on that report. But more often than not, your agent can go in and say, look, none of these locations were theirs. This is a new property, and that doesn't affect that new premium. It's your homeowner's policy that will follow you more than anything. And it will follow you forever. And the claim stays with the property as well. So the next person who buys that, it shouldn't affect their premium, but it'll still show up as a claim that happened on that location. Other questions at all? Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Renee.
Now the hard part, she's gonna quiz me.
Yeah. Let's see, oh, will you pass some of these around, Shane, and then also pass around
Oh,
feedback forms, please.
oh, yes. And I forgot to mention, something you should consider doing on your rental properties. If there's a water issue or a gas issue in your properties, how often is it your tenant knows where to go to turn those things off? Label them and make sure they know where that's at. I mean, these are pretty visible. You could have these if you want some. I'd be happy to share them, but you could also print out and laminate something just so it's obvious where it's at. Shutting off water when there's a water loss will be your best friend. Because the less water there is, the less damage there is. So if you want some of these, I do have some.
Do we want some of those? I want
Yeah,
one.
I want some.
Yeah.
We'll grab them. Let me grab them real quick and you can pass them around. I want a bunch. Well, I may have to order some more and get them to you. But I can do that too. I thought we had a ton of them and I went to get them. I've been going through these a lot.
Well, they're such a great idea.
Well, I didn't know where to turn my own water off.
Yeah.
I mean, you just don't, it's not one of those things you think about. Your spouse knows, you don't think about it. And
Yeah.
then when is the water lost? When the spouse isn't home.
Yeah.
It's always the way it's
When
going
they're
to
on
be.
the acre trail.
Or you smell gas and you can't figure out why and it's not coming from your stove.
Yeah.
Where do you turn the gas off? People just don't know those things. And tenants, they don't pay attention.
Mm-mm.
They don't, nothing's ever gonna happen.
Mhm.
So.
That's why I love inspection reports that give that information. Because I
Yes.
can at least pull up some document that I've had previously and find that information. Okay, avid investors, we have Renae Goodwin of Payne West Insurance, who has told us so many wonderful things. We have avid investors here in the room. I'm StacyA McBain with Swope Investment Properties. Let's recap,
Okay.
shall we, Renae?
Yes.
What I heard you say is the number one mistake that folks may make when it comes to insurance is not having the right person on the policy. It's important to make sure you've got the person, whomever's name is on the deed, the title, it needs to be match the name on the insurance policy.
Correct.
And people all the time have it in a trust or an LLC, and that's not insured.
Right. Could cause you problems at claim time.
And if we have an Airbnb, we need to know a whole bunch of other things,
Yes, a whole bunch of other things.
such as we either need to have proper insurance, literally with the company proper, and plan to pay 5 times the cost of the insurance,
Depends on the coverage, but it can be that much more.
or we need to have a endorsement added to maybe a Safeco policy, but only a few carriers will actually allow you to do that. And that's where we're notifying them, hey, it is a short-term rental. And by the way, this whole but we do it for 30 days at a time, that's still short-term. Right?
There are actually companies also coming out with home sharing endorsements. So if you rent part of your home, they'll add an endorsement on where you're just home sharing. So new things coming out on that all the time. The insurance industry has a tendency to be a little bit behind on that, but they'll eventually catch up.
And the other thing that we forget to do when we're talking about the number one mistakes that landlords and homeowners make is we forget to add personal property insurance. And so our appliances are not included. So if our house gets raided and our fridge is gone and our washer and dryer is gone or trashed or flooded, those things are not included in our insurance policy.
Right. And that can vary a little bit. Some companies can actually throw some of that in automatically, so it's worth checking.
Okay, so that's what we ask Renae, or we ask your agent if you have someone else who might not be as good as her. And then rising replacement costs, failing to notice that the $300 per square foot is the new $150 per square foot when it comes to replacement costs could be a big mishap if we actually have a mishap.
Right. Never let your policy go for more than a couple years without reviewing that. And that's in the upturns and the downturns. Why pay more for more coverage than you need as well?
And then I didn't love the part where I learned that liability is infinite, where property loss is finite. The loss of our property may be limited to its value, its rebuild cost, its contents, but there is no limit to the number an attorney can put on a piece of paper when they sue everybody who was near an incident, like a dog bite. And so for that, we need to make sure that we not only have a really good umbrella, but we also need to make sure that we have our tenants carry liability insurance. And if they have their own renter's insurance, then they can tap into that. If our fridge breaks and they lose all their food and that's an insurance claim in their mind, they're not going to necessarily call us.
Right, they'd have their own policy for those things. Because you don't insure their food.
And it also, if our water heater breaks and floods all their stuff and ruins their furniture, that's their insurance, because our insurance doesn't cover that. So there's a million reasons we can sell that to tenants. And that's the example that I like to use is my water heater could blow up and flood all your stuff and you can lose everything and my insurance isn't going to cover it. And then I heard you say the umbrella insurance is the only good buy left in insurance, but maybe we're supposed to.
I shouldn't say the only one. They're all good ones. It just happens to be one of the least costly at this time.
But that our umbrella really needs to not be 1 million and feeling good about it, because 1 million is the new 100,000 and we need to have our umbrella cover our net worth if we want to have our net worth covered. And then when it comes to insurance, there's different options, and Janice Dyke asked if loyalty is good and if what type of agent you use is good. And I think what we really heard there is relationships are key. You want to make sure that you trust that your agent is not only giving you the right policy that you need and understands your portfolio, but also is going to go to bat for you if there actually is a claim.
Absolutely.
And you can only do 2 before they kick you to the curb. So be careful what you actually claim.
Happens a lot. Yes, absolutely.
And to reduce that temptation to make unnecessary claims, carry a higher deductible, because then you won't even be tempted and then you won't be paying for it. Thank you, Renae.
You get an A.
Yay! Thank you, Renae.
Thank you.
Avid Investors. Janice, it skipped. I don't see it. Oh, good. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody. Oh, and don't hesitate to email me if you need a copy of the slides.